This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
EU and Russia condemn American sanctions on a Russian gas pipeline to Germany. Protests continue to rage in India against citizenship law, with at least 21 dead. And French President Macron says French forces have killed 33 militants in Mali operation. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme, African defence ministers and security chiefs meet in Egypt. And in sports, Eritrea out to use stunning 2019 CECAFA Senior Challenge success to boost football at home. We begin with the European Union and Russia joining forces against the United States by condemning American sanctions on a pipeline project to send natural gas from Russia to Germany. President Donald Trump signed the bill on Friday, which targets companies building the pipelines under the Baltic Sea. The European Commission is now analysing the impact of the sanctions. Its spokesperson said EU rules on pipelines to the bloc have been recognised by the US in the past. Dan Ashby has more from Moscow.
Russia's parliament, the Duma, has released a statement saying that these sanctions are trying to eliminate Russia from the energy market. And President Putin has already hinted that he would look at reciprocal measures. His spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, says that these sanctions violate international law. Now, the US measures are targeted at Nord Stream 2, a major new gas pipeline from Russia to Germany that would allow Moscow to bypass Ukraine. And the sanctions would affect European companies which are working with Moscow to build the pipeline. Already one has said that it's suspending construction. Now, Moscow has come out and says the pipeline will be finished, but the question is, how will they be able to do that if companies, if their big private partners, do pull out? Dan Ashby, CGTN, Moscow.
Now, Ukraine will be part of the energy flow from Russia by way of a separate gas transit deal just struck with the Kremlin. That deal will ensure Russia's supply of gas to Europe via Ukraine for at least 5 years. The sanctions aimed at Russia are part of a $738 billion defense policy bill, which also officially creates a new space force.
This is a truly historic day for the American Armed Forces. In just a few minutes, I will proudly sign into law the largest ever investment in the United States military. In fact, I could say the largest ever by far. Today also marks another landmark achievement as we officially inaugurate the newest branch of our military. This is a very big and important moment. It's called the Space Force.
The Space Force is the first new branch of the US military in more than 60 years. Its creation was a top priority for Trump and is aimed at securing the United States' interests in space. Trump signed the bill at a military hangar at Joint Base Andrews near Washington before leaving with his family for Florida. China has expressed serious concerns about parts of the US defense bill that address Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet. A spokesperson for the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National People's Congress said the clauses ignore facts and are full of bias. He also condemned America for meddling in China's internal affairs. The spokesperson urged the US to abandon its Cold War mentality. The leaders of the two countries earlier held a phone call on Friday about the state of ongoing trade talks. Last week, the two sides managed to wrap up what they called phase one of an agreement, but there's lots more work to do. CGTN's Jing Runan has more.
Chinese President Xi Jinping hailed the progress the two sides were making on the phone call, saying their efforts would ultimately benefit both countries and the world. He also noted how it was all carried out on the basis of equality and mutual respect, something Beijing insists must be part of any deal. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the two sides were ready to move on to the next crucial stage of negotiations.
We have a clear position on the U.S.-China trade issue. The two sides have recently reached a consensus on the text of the Phase 1 deal. Now the two sides are proceeding with follow-up work. I think you all have noted the statements from both sides. As we said before, to reach a Phase 1 deal serves the interests of China, the U.S., and the world, and lives up to the expectations of the international community.
The U.S. president seemed just as keen on the phone call, saying he wanted to get Phase 1 signed and sealed as soon as possible. It's hoped Phase 1 will be the start of a rollback of tariffs following a 21-month standoff. The U.S. agreed to cancel some of its existing tariffs on Chinese goods, whilst China agreed to purchase more American agricultural products, amongst others. So what comes next? The agreement was met with relief by investors and shoppers in the U.S., and it couldn't hardly have come at a better time for Trump. The U.S. president is being impeached at home, whilst he's also facing into a grueling re-election campaign in 2020. He said he didn't know what Phase 2 would bring, but the existing 25% tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese imports would stay in place for now. Meanwhile, the Chinese president also raised concern over what he called negative U.S. actions over events in the Chinese territories of Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet. Xi stressed that Washington should stay out of Beijing's internal affairs. Despite this, Trump said he was looking forward to maintaining communication in the near future. Whether the sides can build further on the recent momentum, at least regarding trade, remains to be seen. Sirinan, CGTN.
Now to the latest on the fallout from the controversial citizenship bill in India. Thousands of people joined fresh protests which have turned violent. 21 people have died in the unrest. There were several demonstrations across the country, with crowds also gathering in New Delhi. Shweta Bajaj has more from the capital.
Protests continue to rage in India, even as Indian Prime Minister is having had a meeting of his Council of Ministers where this conversation about how to handle the rising protests around India was also discussed. Meanwhile, because of the protests, the Indian government has also said that it's willing to take suggestions of people on the Citizen Amendment Bill. But yet it was the bloodiest day for the protests yesterday. In the Indian capital, New Delhi, things have been much better today, but in other parts of India, protests continue to rage, especially in the state of Uttar Pradesh and in the state of Bihar. The Citizen Amendment Bill basically says that refugees of all religions would be allowed from Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh, but not Muslims. Indian Muslims and the critics of the bill believe that this is against the Indian Constitution. There have also been a huge amount of protests that happened in a hub which is called Jamia University, and also there was violence there, because of which many other students have also joined the protest. In the Indian capital, in a masjid called Jama Masjid, there was a massive protest. Footage which came through social media showed that the police used force and also arrested many minors. Through the night, there were activists, lawyers and journalists standing outside the Delhi police headquarters asking for the people who have been detained to be released. The videos also show that the violence was also done on people who were just passing by. On the other side, the Indian government and the supporter of the Citizen Amendment Bill say that the Indian Muslims have nothing to worry about and the entire protests are politically motivated. One thing is for sure, that the disturbances that we are witnessing in India, they are not likely to end anytime soon. Shweta Bajaj, CGTN, New Delhi.
French President Emmanuel Macron has said French forces killed 33 militants in a Mali operation. During his visit to the Ivory Coast, he pledged to fight for lasting security in Africa. Macron met soldiers from the front lines who have been battling militants in the Sahel region. Côte d'Ivoire is home to one of France's largest military bases in the region. Macron also paid tribute to local United Nations and French soldiers who lost their lives in the fight against militants in the Sahel. He's set to visit Niger on Sunday. President Macron's latest tour comes amid a rise in attacks by militants allied to Al-Qaeda and ISIL, and he's promising to crush them.
Barkhane is a vital mission for France. We will continue fighting against jihadist terrorists, and we will continue to do it with our African, European, and other international partners.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including African defence ministers and security chiefs meet in Egypt. And a new art exhibition in Ghana aims to highlight the country's scientific achievements.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The 12th ordinary meeting of the Specialised Technical Committee on Defence, Safety and Security took place this week in Egypt's new administrative capital. The three-day event featured a series of meetings by experts, army chiefs of staff and ministers of defence from African countries. Yasser Hakim has more.
The African Ministers of Defence and Security have discussed means of dealing with issues of security in the continent. High on the agenda was combating terrorism.
There were 2 days of meetings on the level of experts before the ministerial meeting. The experts drew up a strategic plan for fighting terrorism. The continent has various tense areas where terrorist groups cause problems, such as Boko Haram in Nigeria and other militant groups in the north of the continent. The ministers studied means to cooperate in dealing with these groups.
Egypt has outlined what it calls the Cairo roadmap for enhancing peacekeeping operations. Egypt says this could be the nucleus of a unified African stance on international peacekeeping operations.
The discussions focused on how to establish a joint African force, where it will be deployed, and how quickly it can be sent in case of emergency. The continent is the richest in natural resources, but it is prevented from using it for development. First, because of the different internal conflicts, and second, Africa lacks the means to benefit from its own resources. Finally, there are foreign parties that don't want the countries on the continent to benefit from its abundance of wealth.
The ministers also discussed the latest efforts for the African Union's initiative, Silencing Guns by 2020. It's an ambitious plan to end all wars, conflicts, gender-based violence, violent conflicts, and preventing genocide in Africa by 2020.
This is a need for most African countries that face the dangers of terrorism or internal conflicts, such as feuding armed groups or tribes. Silencing the Guns initiative is important to end conflicts using peaceful means in Africa.
In their meetings, the defense ministers stressed the need for closer cooperation and more dialogue between African nations. Working together is essential to achieve peace and security in the continent. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The UN Security Council's renewal of the UN peacekeeping mission's mandate in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been met with mixed reaction across the country. While some political analysts have hailed the move, many residents in eastern DRC have expressed disappointment about the new mandate. CGTN's Chris Ochemringa has that report from Kinshasa.
The mandate of the UN peacekeeping mission in the DRC, known by its French acronym MONUSCO, has been extended to December 20th next year. The UN Security Council unanimously voted to renew its mandate in New York. The resolution, drafted by France, will see the 16,000-strong force continue protecting civilians and supporting the stabilization of DRC's state institutions. This political analyst in Kinshasa welcomed the decision.
I support the extension, but it should be strengthened to deal with armed groups.
But some Congolese from the east of the country are disappointed about the development.
The international community is spending money on initiatives that don't bring any yield. And the MONUSCO case is an example. We have had several UN missions all over the world, and if you were to go one by one, in many cases, it has been failure.
Last month, residents in the eastern town of Beni staged anti-UN protests following an increase in the killing of civilians by rebels. They accused UN peacekeepers of failing to protect them. The UN is now carrying out joint military operations with the Congolese army to wipe out the armed groups. The mission has brought in Brazilian troops to train Congolese forces.
As you know, Brazil and has a lot of equatorial forests also, so they are good with these techniques, and we believe that this is something that could help the FARDC in gaining new skills.
The UN peacekeeping mission began in 1999 after a conflict known as the Second Congo War broke out in eastern DRC. Many Congolese in eastern DRC have been calling for the withdrawal of UN peacekeepers from their area. But the DRC president believes the Blue Helmets still have an important role to play in pacifying the eastern part of his country. The locals in the conflict-prone area only hope that the Security Council's recommendation for the creation of an exit strategy is enforced soon. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
A new art exhibition in Ghana aims to highlight the country's scientific achievements. Artists and scientists have teamed up for the exhibition, which includes paintings, music, poetry and video installations. The art is on display at the National Museum of Science and Technology. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports now from Accra.
Artwork in the shape of the Ebola virus. Albert Ninoti Dewuna created this piece consisting of tiny white crosses, each topped with a blue surgical glove, to commemorate health workers who died in the 2014 Ebola epidemic.
There were 42 Ghanaians, on record, that were sent to help in the Ebola. Even though their names were not there captured, but at least you see that Ghana participated. Then in some of the research I saw, I realized that Ghana even made preparation to prepare in case there's an Ebola case, like how they will solve it.
Ghana's health workers and researchers fought to keep Ebola at bay as it swept through several other West African countries. Albert is hoping his artwork will help tell their story. It's one of dozens of pieces on display at the Evolution of Science Arts exhibition in Accra. The exhibition is organized by the NGO GH Scientific and is meant to throw the spotlight on medical and scientific research in Ghana. Courage Honke drew this portrait of Dr. Letitia Obeng, the first Ghanaian woman to earn a PhD in science.
Dr. Letitia Obeng made a research on the black fly, the aquatic stages of the black fly, which is the main parasite for causing the river blindness.
Photographer Kobe Blay captured this image, showing how a Ghanaian nurse innovated an artificial eye to fix those who had their eyes damaged as a result of accidents or infections.
As at the time I was shooting these photos, where this was the first that was around, and the person who was leading this production was actually the first ocular nurse around in the country. So she was providing that sort of help for persons who have badly damaged eye or they would need some replacement.
Science research is still growing in Ghana. Increasingly, the nation's scientists and researchers are joining international projects and leading their own research efforts. The artists here want to document some of those achievements. Over the past few months, artists and scientists worked together to create these art installations. Their works will go around the country to educate people about the role played by some Ghanaian science researchers to improve healthcare delivery. The artwork will be donated to the National Museum of Science and Technology after traveling around the country. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including Eritrea plan to use 2019 CECAFA Senior Challenge success to boost football at home.
Years of conflict and an Ebola outbreak left Africa's oldest independent republic devastated. Liberia is now trying to rebuild amid numerous challenges, from industry, health, and even culture. It's a story of resilience and hope. Join me, Susan Mongeli, as we take a look at how Liberians are charting a new path, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Eritrea stunned East Africa when they finished second in the just concluded 2019 CECAFA Senior Challenge Cup held in Kampala in Uganda. Having produced the most valuable player at the regional competition, the Red Camels now want to use their shock success to boost football back home and perform better at future international tournaments. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga has more.
A campaign to boost their football rankings. The Red Camels are ranked 205th in the world by FIFA, and they want to improve on this. During the just concluded CECAFA tournament in Uganda's capital Kampala, the Eritreans proved to be a formidable side. They defeated Kenya 4-1 to reach the final.
They did so many practices, modern football, and theoretically and practically. They learned a lot, so this shows how they are learning and displaying. This one is for the development, shows the development of Eritrea.
This is the first time Eritrea is reaching the finals of the CECAFA Challenge Cup. The coach believes the momentum here will help them in future tournaments. And the fans are confident that the team is on the right track.
They have trained well. They are strong in defense, midfield, wing, all.
Solomon. But as they improve on their score tally, experts say they need to work on their strength.
They've got to be a stronger team, because if you look at the way they played against Uganda, yes, they were using the ball quite well and they were passing the ball well, but you know, when it came to the just brute strength that is needed at such a level against a team like Uganda that has players that have played in qualifiers of the Africa Cup of Nations and things of that kind, and have players that have won this tournament before, they've got the experience. There's something that you've got to improve on.
From 1957 to 1990, Eritrea featured at the Africa Cup of Nations as part of Ethiopia. Now an independent nation for almost 3 decades, Eritrea is keen on taking a step further to feature at the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations in Ivory Coast. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Over to the English Premier League, where Everton has played out a goalless draw against Arsenal.